20 years I kept the terraces at Tarn Hollow from dying, and nobody thanked me for it, because nobody notices a field that doesn't fail. That was the whole of my work. Wake before the gray light came over the ridge, walk the irrigation channels with a hoe over my shoulder, and coax another season out of soil that had been thin since before I was born. My name is Meyer Voss, and I dug dirt for a living on a colony world called Esmer, on a stretch of terraced hillside the old map still listed as Ashori ground, after the people who'd farmed it 10,000 years before we ever landed. Esmer wasn't a kind world to farm, not in the way the recruitment posters back on the homeworld had promised. The soil ran thin over old bedrock, and every third season some new blight or drought took a bite out of what we'd grown, and the colony board talked, every year or two, about whether Tarn Hollow was worth the subsidy it cost to keep alive. I'd buried 2 seasons' harvest in a bad year once, plowed it straight back under rather than watch it rot in the silos, and never told anyone how much that had cost me to do without flinching. You learn, on a world like that, not to ask for credit. You learn the work is the only argument that matters, and you make it every single morning whether anyone's watching or not. We knew about the Ashari the way you know about weather on a planet you've never visited secondhand, mostly from the survey teams who came through every few years with their scanners and their grant money, looking for ruins under our wheat. They found plenty: broken walls, drainage channels older than any human language, a terrace wall half a click from my own plot, with a sealed door in it that nothing, not heat, not acid, not 3 generations of university expeditions, had ever managed to open. They cataloged it, photographed it, declared it inert, and went home. The door stayed shut. I walked past it most mornings on my way to the lower fields and never thought twice about it, the same way you don't think twice about a locked shed that isn't yours. Then the late frost 2 winters back cracked the retaining wall above the 3rd terrace, and half the hillside came down in the night. By morning there was a slump of raw earth where good soil used to be, and underneath it, where no survey had ever reached, a chamber with its roof torn open to the sky. I wasn't the one who found it. I was the one who went down into it, because somebody had to check whether the chamber had taken the irrigation line with it, and I was the one who knew where the pipes ran. I climbed down through the broken roof with a hand lamp and my boots full of wet clay, swearing at the cold. The chamber underneath was smaller than I expected, and drier, like the collapse had finally let in the first fresh air it had breathed since it was sealed. The walls were cut stone, fitted close without mortar, the way the old Ashari work always was, and along the base of one wall ran a shallow channel that I recognized before I understood why. It was an irrigation cut, the same pitch and width as the ones I dug myself, just older than anything I'd ever laid hands to. Whoever had built this room had cared about the same small, stubborn problem I cared about every morning, getting water to go where it was needed and stay there. That's where I found her half out of the rubble, lying on her side like she'd been thrown there and forgotten. A figure knee-high, carved from a stone I didn't have a name for, dark gray going to deep blue where the light caught it right. A woman's shape, robed, one arm raised, a sheaf of carved grain held against her chest like something she'd been guarding a long time. Her face had worn soft at the edges, the way stone does after centuries, but you could still see she'd been carved with care. Somebody had loved making her. I didn't think it was anything. I want to be honest about that because the story gets told different ways now and most of them make me sound wiser than I was. I thought it was a grave good, the kind they'd find 1,000 of before the dig was done, and I picked her up the way you'd pick up a dropped tool, quick, careless, more concerned with not dropping her again than with what she was. I tucked her under my arm, climbed back up through the broken roof, and called for the foreman. That's when I felt it, a warmth, low in my forearm where she rested against my sleeve. Not hot, not strange enough to make me drop her, just a warmth that had no business being in a piece of cold stone that had spent who knew how long under frozen ground. By the time I set her down on the foreman's table, the warmth had become a glow. Thin gold lines, no wider than a hair, tracing up through the grooves of her robe like water finding the lowest path it could take. The foreman, a heavy-set man named Orrin who I'd worked under for 6 years and never once seen rattled, went very quiet and very still. The archivist who'd been sent out from the capital to log the slump, a young man named Halden, who'd spent 2 weeks being politely bored by the lot of us, set down his tablet without seeming to notice he'd done it. Nobody said anything for a long moment. The gold kept climbing, patient, the way light comes up over a ridge at dawn, not asking permission of anyone. It found the raised arm. It reached the grain sheaf in her carved hand and held there, steady and warm, like a lamp finally lit after a very long dark, and the quiet she'd kept for 10,000 years finally broke. I want to say I felt chosen in that moment, like something out of the old stories the colony kids tell each other on long winter nights. I didn't. I felt seen, which is a different and quieter thing and harder to carry. The voice that came wasn't loud. It came up through the stone the way the gold had, low and old and certain, in a cadence none of us could place, and all of us understood anyway. Queen of the unbroken line, it said, you have kept what I could not. I didn't answer right away because I didn't know what there was to answer. Orrin told me later that I just stood there with my hand still resting on her shoulder, the way you'd rest a hand on a tired animal at the end of a long day. Halden, to his credit, didn't reach for his tablet. He just watched, the way you'd watch something you knew you'd spend the rest of your life trying to describe and never quite managing. It took the better part of that night, and most of the visiting scholars' careful, apologetic questions, before I understood what she'd told me. The Ashori hadn't measured their queens by blood, the way our own old kingdoms back on the homeworld once had. They'd measured them by the fields. A queen was the one who kept the unbroken line of harvests going when everyone around her had quietly decided the soil was finished, who walked the channels at gray dawn and asked nothing for it, year on year, until the asking itself became beside the point. The idol wasn't a grave good. She was a seal, set down in the last failing season of that civilization, meant to wait however long it took, for someone who tended a dying ground the same way the Ashori queens once had, and to recognize her when she finally came. 10,000 years is a long wait for anyone. Longer, I'd think, for something carved from stone with nothing to do but wait in the dark and hope the soil above her kept finding hands willing to work it. I asked Halden before he packed up his tablet and went back to the capital with a report he clearly didn't know how to write, why the door in the terrace wall had never opened for any of the survey teams. He didn't have a real answer. I think I do, though I've never said it out loud until now. They came to study her. I came to fix a pipe. The difference mattered more than anything they'd brought with them. I still walk the terraces most mornings, though I've got help now. The colony's been generous about that, in its quiet way, since the story got out. I still pass the broken wall where the sealed door used to be, and most days I don't think about what's down there at all, the same as before. But some mornings, when the gray light's just coming up over the ridge and the channels are running clear, I think about a queen who waited 10,000 years for someone who never once thought she was doing anything worth a title, and I think the line was never broken at all. It just went quiet for a while, waiting for someone to keep walking the fields like they mattered, long after everyone else had decided they didn't.